Orphan boy inherited only an abandoned barge from his father, but what was inside? Michael James held the yellowed paper between his fingers when the news reached him. At 9 years old, after 3 long years of waiting, he finally received something from his father, who had disappeared without explanation. The only inheritance was an old barge, full of rusty cars, floating in the middle of the Mississippi River. Mrs. Patricia, his aunt and the only family he had left, looked at the document with disdain when the notary's office delivered the papers. The boy had inherited that mountain of scrap metal that everyone in the Riverside Springs community knew well. It was a joke among the fishermen and merchants of the region. "That thing isn't even worth the paper it's written on," murmured the woman, adjusting her flour-dusted apron. "Your father was always a dreamer, Michael James. Now he's left this junk for you to carry." The boy didn't answer. His brown eyes remained fixed on the window of the small brick house, watching the muddy waters of the river that cut through the town. Since he was little, he had always been different from the other children. While they played in the square, he preferred to watch the movements of the boats, trying to understand the secrets the river kept. That afternoon, after Aunt Patricia left to sell her pastries at the market, Michael James made a decision. He took the old canoe that was tied up behind the house and rowed toward the barge. The sun was strong and sweat dripped down his forehead as he approached the structure that would soon be his. The barge was larger than it seemed from the shore. Dozens of cars stacked on top of each other created a strange landscape in the middle of the calm waters. Some vehicles were old, others newer, but they all had something in common. They had been there a long time, forgotten by the world. Michael James tied the canoe to one of the wooden beams and climbed onto the vessel. His rubber sandals made a wet noise as he stepped onto the damp deck. The smell of rust mixed with the odor of the river filled his nostrils. It was a place that seemed abandoned by time, but something about it sparked the boy's natural curiosity. Walking among the automobiles, he noticed that some seemed to have been arranged on purpose. They weren't simply thrown there any which way. There was a logic to the arrangement, as if someone had thought carefully about where to place each one. This intrigued him even more. That's when he found the first surprise. Between 2 cars in the most remote part of the barge, he discovered a small wooden cabin that wasn't visible from the shore. The structure was half hidden, camouflaged among the larger vehicles. The door was ajar, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. Michael James pushed the door slowly, not knowing what to expect. What he saw left him speechless. The place was clean and organized. There was a small bed with folded sheets, some clothes hanging on an improvised clothesline, and a table with leftover food that didn't seem spoiled. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. His heart raced. The boy looked around, trying to process what he was seeing. Who could it be? Why would they be living on that barge that everyone considered abandoned? And why had his father left this to him? Questions piled up in his mind as he explored every corner of the cabin. On an improvised shelf, he found well-kept tools organized by size. Screwdrivers, hammers, pliers, all clean and ready for use. Under the bed, he discovered boxes with car parts separated by category. When he heard the sound of a canoe approaching, Michael James felt panic take over his body. Quickly, he left the cabin and hid behind one of the larger cars. It was his Uncle Harold, Aunt Patricia's brother, rowing hurriedly toward him. "Michael James," shouted the man, still at a distance. "Where are you, boy? Your aunt is worried sick." The boy emerged from his hiding spot, trying to look natural. Uncle Harold was a good man, but he talked too much. If he told about the cabin, soon the whole town would know. And Michael James had a feeling that should remain a secret, at least for now. "I was just looking at the cars, Uncle," he replied, hopping into the man's canoe. "This place isn't safe, son. These planks are all rotten. You could fall in the water and drown," said Harold, starting to paddle back toward the shore. "Besides, your father never liked anyone messing with these things." That phrase caught Michael James's attention. Uncle Harold knew more about the ferry than he let on. The boy decided to test him. "You know this ferry well, Uncle?" "Yes, I do. Your father spent a lot of time here, always tinkering with these old cars, organizing parts, fixing things. He said it was a hobby, but I always thought it was strange." "Strange how?" Harold stopped paddling for a moment and looked at his nephew with a serious expression. Your father was a mysterious man, Michael James. He never properly explained what he did. I only know he helped a lot of people around here, but never wanted to explain how. The rest of the way to the shore was made in silence. Michael James was lost in thought, trying to piece together the puzzle that had begun to form in his mind. The inhabited cabin, the organized tools, the cars arranged with purpose, and now the revelation that his father really did work in that place. When they got home, Aunt Patricia was at the door, her face red with nervousness. "Where were you, boy? I told you not to go near that thing," said the woman, grabbing Michael James's arm tighter than necessary. "He was at the ferry, Patricia. Just being curious," explained Harold, tying up his canoe. "Well, that curiosity ends now," declared the aunt. "Michael James, you are forbidden from going back there, and I don't want to hear any argument about it." The firmness in Aunt Patricia's voice was something Michael James had rarely witnessed. The woman had always been affectionate and understanding, even in the most difficult times. Seeing her so upset about the ferry only increased his certainty that there were many more secrets hidden in that place. That night, the boy lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and planning his next visit to the ferry. His aunt's prohibition didn't matter. He needed to understand what was happening. He needed to find out who had been living in that cabin and why Aunt Patricia had gotten so nervous when she learned of his visit. While the house slept, Michael James got up silently and went to the window. The ferry was visible in the distance, a dark silhouette floating on the waters silvered by moonlight. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A small light was moving between the cars. Someone was there at that very moment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Michael James rubbed his eyes, thinking he might be dreaming, but the light was still there, moving slowly between the stacked vehicles. It was a flashlight or lantern, clearly held by someone who knew their way well through that mess of scrap metal. The boy felt a mix of fear and fascination. Who could that person be? Were they dangerous? And why didn't Aunt Patricia want him to know about this? The questions hammered in his head as he watched the mysterious light move across the ferry. Suddenly, the light went out. Michael James waited a few minutes, but it didn't reappear. Frustrated and more curious than ever, he went back to bed but couldn't sleep anymore. He lay there planning how he would get back to the ferry without his aunt noticing. The next morning, Aunt Patricia left early to take her pastries to the downtown market. It was Friday, the busiest day of the week, and she always took a long time to return. Michael James waited until she was out of sight and ran to get the canoe. This time he rowed more carefully, trying not to make noise. When he reached the ferry, everything seemed normal. The cars were exactly as he had left them the day before, and there were no visible signs that anyone had been there during the night. But when he entered the cabin, he found a subtle difference. The bedsheets were slightly rumpled, as if someone had slept there. And on the table there was a glass with still fresh water, and some cookies that definitely weren't there the day before. Michael James felt a shiver run down his spine. Someone really was using that place as a home. But who? And why hide during the day? He decided to explore the ferry further, looking for other clues that might explain the mystery. It was then that he made his second major discovery. At one end of the vessel, hidden between two larger cars, there was a compartment he hadn't noticed before. It was a sort of makeshift hold, covered by a dark tarp that blended with the shadows of the vehicles. With his heart pounding, Michael James slowly lifted the tarp. Inside the compartment, he found something that left him completely bewildered. Dozens of driver's licenses scattered about, all old and from different people. Along with them were stacks of vehicle transfer documents, all dated from previous years. Picking up some of the documents carefully, he began to read the names. To his surprise, he recognized several of them. Mrs. Martha from the bakery, Mr. Joseph from the gas station, the Thompson family who lived up the street. They were all people known in the Riverside Springs community. What were those documents doing there? And why were there so many different driver's licenses? Michael James sat on the floor of the compartment, trying to understand what he was seeing. The papers looked official, with stamps and signatures, but they were all yellowed with age. It was then that he heard footsteps approaching on the ferry deck. Quickly, He put some of the documents in his shorts pocket and covered the compartment again with the tarp. He came out of his hiding spot trying to seem natural, but his heart was racing. To his surprise, who appeared between the cars was Mrs. Eleanor, a white-haired lady who lived near the dock and had always been a friend of the family. The woman stopped when she saw him, with a startled expression on her wrinkled face. "Michael James, what are you doing here, son?" "Hi, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm just getting to know the ferry my father left me," he replied, trying to sound casual. The lady looked around nervously, as if searching for something or someone. You haven't seen anything strange around here, have you?" she asked quietly. "Strange how, Mrs. Eleanor?" The woman moved closer to him and whispered, "I've seen lights here for several nights over the last few months. I thought it was just my imagination, but now that you're here—" Michael James decided to trust the lady. Mrs. Eleanor had always been a good person who looked after the kids on the street and never harmed anyone. "I saw a light last night too, Mrs. Eleanor, and today I found signs that someone slept in the cabin over there." The lady's expression changed completely. She looked around once more, as if afraid of being watched. "Son, you need to be very careful. This ferry, it has stories not everyone knows." "What kind of stories?" Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, clearly torn between telling or not what she knew. "Your father. He wasn't just an ordinary man, Michael James. He helped people who were in trouble. Serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Debts. Mainly debts that people couldn't pay. Your father had a way of resolving those situations." Michael James felt a mix of confusion and interest. He showed Mrs. Eleanor some of the documents he had taken from the secret compartment. "Do you know any of these people?" She took the papers with trembling hands, and her eyes widened. "Of course I know them. They all had problems with—" She stopped abruptly, looking around again. "With what, Mrs. Eleanor?" "Listen well, my boy. You need to take these papers home and hide them very well, and never ever tell anyone you found them here." "Why? What do they mean?" "They mean your father was trying to help these families when he had to leave." The way she said "had to leave" caught Michael James's attention. It wasn't "went away" or "disappeared." It was "had to leave," as if he hadn't had a choice. "Mrs. Eleanor, did my father leave because he wanted to or because someone forced him?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Your father was a man too brave for his own good, Michael James. He saw injustices and couldn't stand by. That ended up creating problems for him." "What kind of problems?" "The kind of problem that makes a man have to leave his family to protect them." That revelation hit Michael James like a punch to the stomach. For 3 years he had believed his father had abandoned him. Aunt Patricia always said he was an irresponsible man who couldn't take care of his family. But now he was beginning to understand that maybe the truth was very different. Why did Aunt Patricia never tell me this? "Your aunt wants to protect you, my boy. She's afraid you'll follow in your father's footsteps." Mrs. Eleanor looked at the sky and noticed the sun was already high. "I need to go, but Michael James, please, be very careful. And if you find anything else here, don't tell anyone but me." "Why would you help me?" "Because I owed your father a favor, and now I can repay it by helping you." She walked away quickly, leaving Michael James alone on the ferry with 1,000 questions in his head. He put away the remaining documents and decided to explore the secret compartment further. He needed to better understand what his father was doing in that place. Returning to the hiding spot, he found more interesting things. There was an old notebook with yellowed pages and handwriting he recognized immediately. It was his father's writing. The boy's heart raced as he began to leaf through the pages. The notes were organized by date, and most were written in a kind of code. But some parts were clear enough to understand. There were people's names, amounts of money, and words like returned, recovered, and resolved. One specific entry caught his attention. March 15th, Thompson family. Car recovered after negotiation. $3,200 returned. Situation normalized. Michael James remembered the Thompson family who lived up the street. They had lost their car a few years back, and he remembered seeing Mrs. Mary Thompson crying on her doorstep for several weeks. But after a while, mysteriously, they got another vehicle. He kept reading the notes and found more similar cases. His father seemed to be documenting operations where he helped families recover things they had lost, mainly cars. And by the amounts noted, he also returned money to them. But where did that money come from? And how did his father manage to recover the vehicles? It was when he found an entry that changed everything. August 2nd, warning, Victor is getting suspicious. I need to be more discreet in the next operations. If anything happens to me, may Michael James discover the truth when he grows up. Michael James read the sentence several times, trying to process what he was seeing. His father had predicted that something might happen to him, and he had left those clues specifically for his son to find. But who was Victor, and why did he represent a danger to his father? Continuing to read, he found more references to that name. Victor always appeared associated with words like predatory collection, illegal interest, and threats. It was beginning to become clear that his father was dealing with a dangerous person. The last entry in the notebook was dated just a few days before his father's disappearance. September 10th, unsustainable situation. Victor found out about the refunds. I need to protect Patricia and Michael James. I'm going to step away for a while until I find a permanent solution. If anything happens to me, everything they need to know is on the ferry. Michael James felt tears burning his eyes. His father had not abandoned them. He was trying to protect them. And more importantly, he was alive. Or at least he was when he wrote that last entry. He put the notebook away with the documents and decided to go back home. He needed to process everything he had discovered and decide what his next step would be. But one thing was clear. He couldn't tell Aunt Patricia anything, at least not yet. When he got home, he found his aunt in the kitchen preparing lunch. She looked at him with a serious expression. "Where were you, Michael James?" "I went for a walk by the docks," he lied, trying to sound natural. "You weren't on that ferry again, were you?" "No, Aunt. I just went to see the fishermen's boats." Aunt Patricia watched him for a few seconds, as if trying to figure out if he was lying. Then she sighed and went back to stirring the pot. "Michael James, I know you're curious about your father, but some things are better left in the past." "Why, Aunt?" "Because the past sometimes hurts more than it helps." The boy wanted to ask more, but he realized Aunt Patricia wasn't willing to talk about the subject. He went up to his room and hid the documents and the notebook under the mattress. He needed a plan to find out more about this Victor and fully understand what his father was doing. That afternoon, he decided to go to the gas station where Mr. Joseph worked, whose name had appeared in the documents. If his father had really helped that man, maybe he could provide more information. The station was at the entrance to town, and Mr. Joseph was known to be a discreet and trustworthy person. When Michael James arrived, the man was organizing some car parts in the back of the shop. "Hi, Mr. Joseph," the boy greeted. "Hi, Michael James. How are you, son?" replied the man, wiping his hands on a rag dirty with grease. "I'm fine. Can I ask you a question?" "Sure, go ahead." Michael James hesitated for a moment, trying to find the best way to approach the subject. "Did you know my father well?" Mr. Joseph's expression changed immediately. He looked around, checking if anyone was listening to the conversation. "Why are you asking that, son?" "It's just that I inherited his ferry, and people say he helped folks around here. I wanted to better understand what he did." Mr. Joseph put his tools on the workbench and moved closer to Michael James. "Your father was a good man, Michael James. A very good man. He helped me when I needed it most." "How so?" The man looked around again before continuing. "A few years ago, I lost my car to a man who lent money here in the area. I couldn't pay the interest he was charging, and he took the vehicle." "And my father helped you get it back?" "He did, but I don't know how. One day I was desperate, thinking about how I was going to work without the car, and your father showed up here. Said he could solve my problem." "And did he?" "He did. A week later, my car appeared at my doorstep in the early hours, along with an envelope containing enough money to settle my debt." Michael James felt a strange emotion upon hearing that, pride mixed with curiosity and a bit of fear. "Do you know who that man lending money was?" Mr. Joseph became visibly nervous at the question. "Michael James, that is a dangerous subject. Your father got into trouble because of it." "But I need to know. It's about my father." The man took a deep breath before speaking. His name is Victor Morrison. He has a business here in the region, loans with very high interest. When people can't pay, he takes everything they have. And my father was confronting him. Not exactly confronting. Your father found a way to, let's say, return to the families what they had unfairly lost. How? That I don't know, Michael James, and I don't want to know. What your father did was risky, and in the end, he had to leave because of it. Mr. Joseph stepped back a little, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. My advice is that you forget this matter. Victor is still around, and he is not the type of person who forgives those who interfere with his business. But what if my father needs help? Michael James, your father knew what he was doing when he left. He did it to protect you and your aunt. Don't ruin his sacrifice by getting involved in this. The boy left the gas station with more questions than answers. Now he knew who Victor was and had a better idea of what his father was facing, but he also began to understand the scale of the danger behind it all. When he returned home, he found Aunt Patricia whispering with Uncle Harold on the porch. They stopped talking as soon as they saw him arrive, which only increased his suspicion that they knew more than they were saying. "What were you talking about?" he asked directly. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Harold exchanged a nervous glance. "Adult matters, Michael James," replied his aunt. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Does it have to do with my father?" "Michael James," began Uncle Harold. "It does, doesn't it?" insisted the boy. Aunt Patricia sighed deeply. "Harold told me you went to the ferry yesterday, and I heard that today you went to talk to Mr. Joseph." Michael James felt his blood run cold. How did she know about his conversation with the gas station owner? How did you know? This is a small town, my boy. News spreads fast, and I'm afraid of what you might be uncovering. Why did you never tell me the truth about my father? Because the truth is dangerous, Michael James. Your father got involved with people who do not forgive, and I don't want the same thing to happen to you. But is he alive? Aunt Patricia hesitated before answering. I don't know, my boy. I truly don't know. But do you think he could be? I hope so. Every day I hope so. That conversation confirmed several of Michael James's suspicions. Aunt Patricia knew much more than she had told him so far, and her reluctance to talk about the subject wasn't just overprotectiveness, but real fear. That night, the boy went back to watching the ferry from his window, and again he saw a light moving among the cars. This time he decided he would find out who that person was, even if it meant openly disobeying his aunt. He waited until he was sure Aunt Patricia was asleep and slipped quietly out of the house. The night was clear with an almost full moon that lit up the river. He took the canoe and paddled slowly, trying not to make a sound. As he approached the ferry, he saw that the light had gone out again. But this time he was prepared. He tied up the canoe and carefully climbed onto the vessel, trying to locate any sign of movement. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Who's there?" Michael James turned quickly and saw a silhouette emerging from between the cars. It was an older man with a grey beard and simple clothes. He held a small flashlight, but did not point it at the boy's face. I'm Michael James," stammered the boy, his heart racing. "Michael James?" repeated the man, and his voice changed tone completely. "Are you Richard's son?" "I am," he replied, surprised that the stranger knew his father's name. The man moved closer, and Michael James could see his face in the moonlight. It was someone he didn't know, but who seemed familiar somehow. "My name is Anthony. I work for your father." "Work? But my father disappeared 3 years ago." "He didn't disappear, son. He's in hiding, and he asked me to look after things here until he could return." Michael James felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "My father is alive?" "He is. And he knows you inherited the ferry. In fact, he was hoping you would come here looking for answers." "Where is he?" "In a safe place. But I can't say where. It's still dangerous." "Because of Victor?" Anthony was surprised by the boy's knowledge. "You already know about him." "I found out today, and I found my father's notebook." "Then you already understand why he had to leave." Michael James nodded, though he still had 1,000 questions. "Anthony, what were you doing here?" Your father discovered that Victor was charging abusive interest to poor families in the region. Interest that wasn't legal. He was documenting everything and, at the same time, trying to help people recover what they had lost. How did you manage to recover the cars? Victor kept the vehicles he took from people in a warehouse outside the city. Your father found out where it was and, let's say he found a way to return them to the families. You stole them back. It wasn't stealing, Michael James. It was justice. Those cars were taken illegally, through fraudulent contracts. Your father was just correcting an injustice. The explanation made sense to the boy, but he still didn't understand everything. And why did he have to run away? Because Victor found out what was happening. He started making threats, not only against your father but against you and your aunt too. Richard decided that the only way to protect the family was by distancing himself. But when is he coming back? Anthony hesitated before answering. That depends on a few things that still need to be resolved. What kind of things? Michael James, your father left a mission for me. I need to finish the work the two of you started. Gather enough evidence to end Victor's business once and for all. And can I help? You're too young for that, son. But I want to help. I want my father to come home. Anthony looked at the boy for a long moment, clearly torn about what to do. All right. But it has to be my way, following my instructions exactly as I say. And your aunt can't know anything. Why? Because if she knew your father was alive, she would be desperate to find him, and that would put everyone in danger. Michael James agreed, though he knew hiding this from Aunt Patricia would be one of the hardest things he had ever done in his life. What do I need to do? For now, keep coming here during the day, as if you were just exploring your inheritance. I'll teach you little by little about the work your father was doing, and together we'll finish what he started. And then your father can come home. That promise was all Michael James needed to hear. No matter how difficult or dangerous it was, he was determined to do whatever was necessary to bring his father back. Anthony walked him to the canoe and helped him off the ferry. Tomorrow, come here in the afternoon. I'll show you some things that will help you understand all this better. All right. And Michael James, be very careful. Victor has eyes and ears all over town. If he finds out you're getting involved in this, he might try to use you to get to your father. The way back home was made in silence, with Michael James lost in thought. He finally had answers to the questions that had haunted him for 3 years. His father was alive, and there was a real chance to bring him back. But he also began to understand the magnitude of the challenge they had ahead. Victor was clearly a powerful and dangerous man, and putting an end to his operations wouldn't be a simple task for a grown man, let alone for a 9-year-old boy. Still, for the first time in a long while, Michael James felt hopeful. He had a mission, he had an ally, and he was certain he was fighting for something worthwhile, bringing his family back. The next morning he woke up earlier than usual and helped Aunt Patricia with the household chores without her needing to ask. The woman found his behavior odd, but said nothing. Michael James was trying to make up in advance for the lies he would have to tell in the coming days. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Aunt Patricia left for work, Michael James waited a bit and then went straight to the ferry. Anthony was already there organizing some materials in the secret cabin. In the daylight, the man looked older than he had seemed the night before. He must have been around 50, with graying hair and a face marked by sun and labor. "Good morning, Michael James," he greeted when he saw the boy arrive. "Good morning, Mr. Anthony. Today I'll explain better how your father's work used to function. Come here." Anthony led him to the compartment where Michael James had found the documents, but now with a proper explanation, he could better understand what he was seeing. "Each of these papers represents a family that was harmed by Victor," explained Anthony, showing the stacks of documents. "Your father documented each case, kept the evidence of the fraud, and then worked to return what had been unjustly taken." "How did you know where Victor kept the cars?" "Your father spent months investigating. He discovered Victor has a large warehouse on a farm about 20 kilometers from town. That's where he keeps everything he takes from people." And you would go in there and take the cars back? It wasn't exactly like that. First, we'd verify if the car had really been taken illegally. Then your father would try to negotiate with Victor, offering to settle the family's debts for a fair amount, without the predatory interest. And if he didn't accept? Then we'd use other methods. Anthony showed Michael James a part of the ferry he hadn't explored yet. It was a covered area where several cars were arranged differently from the others. These seemed to be in better condition, as if they had been cared for recently. These here are cars that still need to be returned to their families. Your father managed to recover them shortly before he had to leave, but didn't have time to make the returns. Michael James counted about 15 vehicles in that section. It was an impressive number. And now the two of us are going to finish the job. We'll return these cars and resolve the situations of the remaining families. But how are we going to do that without Victor noticing? Your father devised a plan before he left. A plan that will put an end to Victor's operations once and for all. Anthony took a thick envelope from inside the cabin. Everything is here. Documents that prove the fraud, records of the illegal interest, even recordings of conversations where Victor admits what he does. Recordings? Your father was very clever. He used to record the conversations when he went to negotiate with Victor. The man is arrogant and would always confess his illegal practices, thinking he was safe. Michael James took the envelope and began to leaf through the contents. There were hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and even some CDs with the recordings. It was impressive material. With all this, why didn't you report him before? Because Victor has powerful friends in the region. Politicians, local authorities. His father knew that if he tried a simple report, it would be covered up, and he would be even more exposed. So what's the plan? The plan is to use the media. His father managed to get in touch with a journalist from Houston who is interested in doing a story on the situation. With all this documentation and the family's testimonies, it would be impossible to cover up the case. The strategy made sense to Michael James. He had seen on television cases where journalists managed to expose irregularities that local authorities tried to hide. And when are we going to put the plan into action? A few things are still missing. We need to get the family's testimonies, organize the evidence better, and most importantly, ensure we have enough protection for when the story airs. Protection. Michael James, when this story is revealed, Victor will try to take revenge on everyone who was involved. His father has already arranged some security measures, but it's still not enough. The boy began to understand the complexity of the situation. It wasn't simply a matter of gathering evidence and handing it over to the authorities. It was a careful operation involving aspects of security, politics, and media strategy. What can I do to help? For now, you can help me organize the documents and get to know the families involved better. Many of them don't even know their cars have already been recovered. Can we start by returning the cars? Not yet. If we start returning them now, Victor will notice someone is messing with his business again. We need to return everything at once, along with the media exposure. Anthony showed Michael James a list with the names of the families who had cars on the barge waiting to be returned. The boy recognized almost all the names. The Anderson family. I know them. Mrs. Catherine always cries when she talks about losing her husband's car that had just been paid off. And she doesn't know the car is here, safe, waiting to be returned to her. Michael James felt a strong emotion imagining Mrs. Catherine's joy when she discovered she would recover her deceased husband's vehicle. Mr. Anthony, how much longer until we put the plan into action? If all goes well, a few weeks, maybe a month. And then my father can come back. He can. In fact, he plans to return exactly the day the story airs. It will be a way to ensure Victor can't do anything against him. The prospect of reuniting with his father in such a short time filled Michael James with energy and determination. A month seemed like a long time, but it was also something concrete, a real goal. What do I need to do today? Today I'm going to teach you how to organize the documents the way his father did. It's meticulous work, but very important. Anthony spent the rest of the morning teaching Michael James the organizational system his father had developed. Each family had a specific folder with all the relevant information: copies of the fraudulent contracts, photographs of the cars, ownership documents, and even personal information about their current financial situation. The work was fascinating to the boy. Each folder told a different human story, but all with a common element: hard-working families who had been exploited by someone taking advantage of their desperation. His father always said that each of these cars represents much more than just a vehicle, explained Anthony. For these families, it represents dignity, independence, the ability to work and support their children. And Victor doesn't care about that. Victor only cares about profit. To him, these people are just a source of income. During lunch, which they had in the ferry's own cabin, Anthony told more stories about his father's work. Michael James was impressed with the dedication and courage the man had shown. Your father spent nights awake planning how to help a specific family. He treated each case as if it were his own family being harmed. Is that why he was never home? Exactly. And your aunt didn't understand why he was always busy with other people. She thought he didn't care about you. But he did care. Very much. Every time we talked, he spoke about you, about how he wanted you to grow up in a fairer world where people like Victor couldn't exploit the weak. That revelation deeply moved Michael James. For 3 years he had carried the pain of thinking he wasn't important to his father. Discovering it was exactly the opposite changed everything in his perspective. In the afternoon, Anthony taught him about another crucial part of the work: how to document new cases of fraud. Victor is still operating even after your father passed, so new families always appear who need help. How do we find out about these cases? Mainly through Mrs. Eleanor. She is our informant in town. When someone comes to her with problems related to Victor, she notes everything and passes the information to me. Michael James remembered his conversation with the lady the day before. That's why she was nervous when she saw me here yesterday. Exactly. She didn't know if you had found out about my work here. And now does she know I'm helping you? Not yet. I'll speak with her tonight. It's important she knows she can trust you. In the late afternoon, as he prepared to return home, Michael James asked a question that had been bothering him since morning. Mr. Anthony, how did you meet my father? I was also a victim of Victor, Michael James. 5 years ago, he took my small business because of a debt I couldn't pay. Your father helped me recover everything and even got money for me to restart the business. And that's why you decided to help him? Not just for that. I saw your father was doing something important, something that could change many people's lives. I wanted to be part of it. Aren't you afraid? I am. But I'm more afraid of living in a world where men like Victor can do whatever they want without consequences. That answer touched Michael James deeply. He understood he wasn't just fighting to bring his father back, but was part of something bigger, something that could truly make a difference in many people's lives. When he got home, he found Aunt Patricia more nervous than usual. She was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, clearly worried about something. What happened, Aunt? Michael James. Someone was asking about you today at the market. The boy's blood ran cold. Asking what? A well-dressed man. He wanted to know about your family, about the ferry you inherited. Asked if you'd been poking around there. What did you tell him? I said you were just a curious kid who didn't know anything about anything, but he didn't seem to believe it. Michael James tried to stay calm, but inside he was terrified. From what Anthony had told him, Victor had eyes and ears all over town, and now it seemed those eyes were turning toward him. What did this man look like? Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes, had an intimidating way about him. Do you think he'll come back? I don't know, my boy. But I'm scared. Very scared. Aunt Patricia sat in the kitchen chair, and Michael James noticed she was trembling. Aunt, are you all right? No, Michael James, I'm not well. That man reminded me of things that happened before your father left. What kind of things? Threats. Strange people moving around town, asking questions about our family. Michael James sat beside his aunt and took her hand. Aunt, I promise I'll be careful. You have to promise me something more important, my boy. What? If that man comes back, if anyone comes here asking questions or making threats, you tell me immediately. And don't try to handle anything alone. I promise. But even as he made the promise, Michael James knew the situation had become complicated. If Victor really was investigating his activities, he would need to be much more careful. And most importantly, he needed to tell Anthony what had happened. That night, against all the safety recommendations he had received, he decided to return to the ferry to warn Anthony about Victor's visit to town. He couldn't wait until the next day to pass on that information. When he arrived at the ferry, he found Anthony organizing some documents by the light of a small lantern. "Michael James? What are you doing here? It's dangerous to come at night." "I know, but something important happened." Michael James told him about the visit of the well-dressed man to the market and about Aunt Patricia's nervousness. Anthony listened to everything in silence, with an increasingly worried expression. "This means Victor suspects you're getting involved in the matter." "How could he suspect? I only started helping yesterday." "Because he's smart, and he probably has informants who saw you talking to Mr. Joseph and Mrs. Eleanor." "What do we do now?" Anthony was silent for a few minutes, clearly thinking about the available options. "We have two alternatives. Either you stop coming here and I continue the work alone, or we accelerate our plans and put everything into action more quickly. What do you think is best?" "Honestly, I think we should speed everything up. If Victor is investigating, it's a sign he's feeling threatened. And if he's feeling threatened, he might try to do something drastic." "Like what?" "He might try to leave the region, taking all the money he managed to steal from the families, or worse, he might try to silence the people who could testify against him." The gravity of the situation became clear to Michael James. It wasn't just a matter of time, but of safety for all the people involved. "What do we need to do?" "Tomorrow I'll contact the journalist from Houston. Let's see if we can speed up the report, and you'll need to help convince some families to give statements as soon as possible." "Which families?" "The most important ones for the investigation, those with the clearest cases of fraud and who aren't afraid to speak." Anthony took out a list of names and showed it to Michael James. "These 5 families are crucial. If we get their statements, we'll have enough evidence for the report." Michael James looked at the names on the list. He knew all of them, but some were more reserved people, who would hardly agree to expose themselves publicly. "I think I can manage to speak with the Thompson family and with Mrs. Catherine, but the others, I'll take care of the others. You focus on those two, as they trust you the most because of your family's friendship." "When should I look for them?" "As soon as possible, but very carefully. If Victor is indeed suspicious, he might be watching these families too." Michael James agreed, although the responsibility made him nervous. He had never done anything so important and dangerous in his life. "Mr. Anthony, are you sure we'll succeed?" "I'm sure we'll try. And we'll do our best to honor the work your father started." "And will he really be able to come back when all this is over?" "He will, Michael James. Your father is eagerly waiting for that day." The way back home was tense. Michael James kept looking around, searching for signs he was being followed. The feeling of danger was real now, no longer a distant possibility. When he entered the house, Aunt Patricia was still awake, sitting in the living room with a rosary in her hands. "Where were you, Michael James?" "I went for a walk. I couldn't sleep." "Please, my boy, don't leave the house at night until this situation is resolved." "What situation, Aunt?" "The situation with that man who showed up today. I have a bad feeling about it." Michael James felt the urge to tell his aunt everything right then, about Anthony, about his father being alive, about the plan to take down Victor. But he remembered Anthony's words about the danger of involving more people. "All right, Aunt. I'll stay home at night. And during the day, you'd better not wander around town alone either." "Aunt, I need to live my normal life. If I start hiding, it'll look like I have something to hide." Michael James's logic was perfect, and Aunt Patricia knew it, but her maternal instinct made her worried. "At least promise me you'll be careful about who you talk to and where you go." "I promise." That night, Michael James slept little and poorly. His mind was full of plans, worries, and the excitement of knowing he might soon see his father again. But there was also the real fear that something could go wrong, and everyone could end up in danger. The next morning he woke up determined to do his part in the plan. He waited for Aunt Patricia to leave for work, and went straight to look for the Thompson family. They lived in a small house at the end of Main Street, and Michael James knew the couple was always home in the mornings. When he knocked on the door, he was greeted by Mrs. Mary Thompson, a middle-aged woman who had always been kind to him. "Hi, Michael James, how are you, son?" "Good morning, Mrs. Mary. I'm fine. Can I talk to you and Mr. Joseph about something important?" "Of course, come in." The house was simple but tidy, with old but well-kept furniture. Mr. Joseph Thompson was in the living room reading an old newspaper. "Good morning, Mr. Joseph." "Good morning, Michael James. Have a seat, son." Michael James sat on the sofa, trying to find the best way to approach the subject. "I wanted to talk to you about the car you lost a few years ago." The couple's expression changed immediately. Mrs. Mary looked down, visibly emotional, while Mr. Joseph became tense. "Why do you want to know about that, Michael James?" "Because I found out my father was trying to help families who went through the same situation as you." "Your father?" "Yes, and now I want to finish the work he started." Mr. Joseph leaned forward, interested. "What do you mean, finish the work?" Michael James took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you still have the car and loan documents?" "We do." "Why?" "Because with those documents we can prove you were cheated, and maybe even get the car back." Mrs. Mary quickly looked up. "What do you mean, get it back?" "I can't explain all the details right now, but there's a real chance you could recover what you lost." The couple exchanged a hopeful but cautious look. "Michael James, this sounds too good to be true," said Mr. Joseph. "I understand why you'd think that, but do you trust me?" "We do. Your family has always been good to us." "Then let me see the documents, and if I can prove you were cheated, would you agree to give a statement about what happened?" "A statement to whom?" "To a journalist who's investigating cases like yours." Mrs. Mary stood up, excited. "Joseph, go get the papers. If there's a chance for us to recover my father's car." The car had belonged to Mrs. Mary Thompson's father, who had passed away a few years earlier. It was a family inheritance that had been lost because of Victor's predatory interest rates. Michael James understood why this case was so emotionally important to the family. When Mr. Joseph returned with the documents, Michael James examined them carefully. Even at 9 years old, he could see some obvious irregularities in the contract. "Look here," he said, pointing to a clause. "The interest you were paying was much higher than what's allowed by law." "We suspected that, but we don't understand laws," admitted Mr. Joseph. "And here, look at this part about the guarantees. The contract says the car would only be taken after 3 months without payment, but you lost it after just 1 week. That's true. We were only a week late and they already came to take it." Michael James borrowed the documents, promising to return them soon. "I'll show this to someone who understands the law. If they confirm it was fraud, are you willing to give a statement?" "We are," replied Mrs. Mary without hesitation. "If there's a chance for justice, we want to be part of it." "And you're not afraid of retaliation?" "We have nothing left to lose, Michael James. If we can help other families avoid what we went through, it'll be worth it." The couple's determination impressed Michael James. He understood why his father had chosen to help people like them. They were decent people who deserved justice. Leaving the Thompsons' house, he went straight to Mrs. Catherine's house. She lived alone in a small house near the church, and Michael James knew she was always home in the mornings, sewing to supplement her income. When Mrs. Catherine opened the door, Michael James saw her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Hi, Mrs. Catherine. Are you okay?" "Hi, dear. Yes, I am. Just a little sad today. Please come in." Mrs. Catherine's house was even smaller than the Thompsons', but impeccably tidy. There were photographs of her late husband everywhere, including a large photo of him next to the car she had lost. "Mrs. Catherine, I came to talk about your Raymond's car." She stopped sewing and looked at Michael James with surprise. "My Raymond's car? Why?" "Because I found out that maybe you didn't lose it fairly." "What do you mean, dear?" Michael James explained the investigation that was being done and the possibility of proving that Victor's contracts were fraudulent. "Do you still have the car and loan documents?" "I have everything saved. I could never bring myself to get rid of those papers, even though they remind me of sad things." "May I take a look?" Mrs. Catherine went to get a shoebox where she kept all her important documents. When she opened it, Michael James saw she had even kept the receipts for payments she made before losing the car. Analyzing the papers, he found even more glaring irregularities than in the Thompsons' case. The interest rates were absurdly high, and there were several clauses that clearly violated consumer protection laws. "Mrs. Catherine, you were robbed," said Michael James, with genuine anger in his voice. "I always suspected that. But what could a widow do against a powerful man like Victor? You can join other families and fight for justice. Alone, I don't have the courage. But if other people were also harmed—" They were. Many others. Michael James told Mrs. Catherine about the Thompson family and how they had agreed to give a statement. "If you also agree to participate, together with other families, you might not only get justice, but perhaps even recover what you lost." "Recover how?" "I can't explain that right now, but I can assure you that possibility exists." Mrs. Catherine fell silent for a few minutes, looking at her husband's photograph. "What would my Raymond do in a situation like this? From what I used to hear people say about him, I think he would fight for what's right." "That's true. He was always a fighter." The woman stood up and took Michael James's hand. "I agree to participate, my son. If there's a chance to get justice for my Raymond and help other families, I want to be part of it. Aren't you afraid? At my age, my son, what we fear is dying without having done the right thing." Mrs. Catherine's courage moved Michael James deeply. That woman who had lost everything and had nothing to gain was willing to fight solely for justice. "I'll need to keep the documents for a few days. Keep them as long as you need. And anything you need from me, just say the word. Would you like to speak personally with the other families who are participating?" "I'd like that very much. We could meet and talk about all of this." Michael James left Mrs. Catherine's house with the 2 sets of documents and a sense of mission accomplished. He had secured the support of the 2 most important families for the investigation, and both were willing to expose themselves publicly to seek justice. But as he was walking back home, he noticed a black car parked on the street corner. The same car passed him slowly twice, and Michael James was sure he was being followed. Feeling real danger for the first time, he quickly ducked into a nearby store and watched through the window. The car stopped in front of the store, and Michael James could see there were 2 men inside. One of them picked up a phone and made a brief call. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, the car drove away. But Michael James understood the situation had become much more serious. Victor wasn't just suspicious. He was actively investigating and possibly tracking his movements. When he finally got home, he decided he needed to tell Anthony immediately about the success with the families and about being followed. But how to get to the ferry without being detected? That's when he had an idea. Uncle Harold always went fishing on Thursday afternoons, and he always passed near the ferry. He could ask to go along and use the fishing trip as a pretext to meet Anthony. When Uncle Harold came home for lunch, Michael James made the invitation. "Uncle, can I go fishing with you this afternoon?" "Of course you can, my boy. It's been a long time since you showed any interest in fishing." "It's just that I need to clear my head. I've been very worried about some things." "Worried about what?" "About the future. About what I'm going to do with my life." The answer was partially true, and Uncle Harold was pleased to know his nephew was thinking about the future. "Fishing is good therapy for organizing your thoughts. We'll leave around 3 o'clock. At 3 in the afternoon, Michael James was in Uncle Harold's canoe, rowing toward the best fishing spot in the area, which was near the car ferry. When they arrived, Uncle Harold focused on preparing the bait, and Michael James took the opportunity to observe the ferry. He didn't see any signs of Anthony, but he knew he would be there. He needed to find a way to communicate with him without raising Uncle Harold's suspicions. "Uncle, I need to go over to the ferry quickly." "What for?" "I forgot to check if the ropes tying it are okay. Since it's mine now, I need to take care of it." Uncle Harold looked at the ferry and then at his nephew. "All right, but be quick, and be careful with those rotten planks." Michael James rowed to the ferry and climbed aboard quickly. He found Anthony hidden in the cabin, organizing the documents they had separated the day before. Michael James, I'm glad you came. How did the conversations with the families go? Very well. Both the Thompsons and Mrs. Catherine agreed to give their statements, and I brought their documents. Anthony quickly examined the papers and smiled. Perfect. With these documents, we have enough evidence to prove the fraud. But there was a bad thing, too. I think I'm being followed. Michael James told him about the black car and the men who watched him during the morning. That is very concerning, said Anthony, visibly apprehensive. If Victor sent someone to follow you, it's because he is taking you seriously as a threat. What do we do? From now on, you don't come here during the day anymore, and at night only in emergencies. But how will I help with the plan? You've already done the most important part, getting the family's support. Now I'll take care of the rest. And when will the report be? I managed to speak with the journalist this morning. He can come here next weekend to do the interviews. Just 1 week? Just 1 week. And your father already knows. He will be here on the day of the report. The news that he would see his father in just 1 week left Michael James euphoric, but also nervous. There was little time left, and a lot could still go wrong. Mr. Anthony, I think we should tell my aunt about all this. Why? Because she is very nervous about the presence of strange men in town, and if she knew the truth, maybe she could help us. Anthony thought for a moment. Perhaps you're right. Patricia has always been a courageous woman, and she knows the townspeople well. So can I tell her? You can, but let me talk to her first to explain the safety details. When? Tonight. Tell her that a friend of your father wants to talk to her about an important matter. Will she accept? If you say it's about your father, she will accept. Michael James returned to Uncle Harold's canoe with a defined plan for the next few hours. He would finally tell the truth to Aunt Patricia, and in 1 week he would be reuniting with his father. The rest of the fishing afternoon passed slowly, with Michael James anxious to get home and talk to his aunt. Uncle Harold noticed his restlessness, but attributed it to the natural anxiety of a 9-year-old boy. When they got home, Aunt Patricia was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Michael James waited for Uncle Harold to move away and approached her. Aunt, I need to talk to you about something important. What is it, my boy? Tonight, a friend of my father wants to talk to you. Aunt Patricia dropped the spoon she was holding and quickly turned to Michael James. A friend of your father? Yes, he has important information about what happened 3 years ago. What kind of information? About why my father had to leave, and about the possibility of him returning. Aunt Patricia sat down in a chair, visibly shaken by the news. Michael James, where did you find this man? At the ferry. He was taking care of my father's things. And you trust him? I do. And I think you will trust him too when you talk to him. Where will this conversation be? He prefers it to be at the ferry. It's safer. Aunt Patricia was silent for a few minutes, clearly torn between the hope of knowing the truth about her brother-in-law and the fear of what she might discover. All right. What time? After dark, when Uncle Harold is asleep. And what if it's dangerous? It won't be, Aunt. I trust this man with my life. That night would be decisive for the whole family's future. And Michael James felt they were finally close to solving a mystery that had lasted 3 years. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. During dinner, Aunt Patricia was visibly nervous. He ate little and spoke even less, lost in thoughts about the conversation he would have in a few hours. Michael James tried to maintain a normal appearance, talking with Uncle Harold about the afternoon fishing. Did you catch anything good? Asked his aunt, trying to disguise her anxiety. The few small mullet, replied Uncle Harold. Michael James seemed a bit distracted today. He seemed to be thinking about other things. It's normal at his age, said Aunt Patricia, looking meaningfully at her nephew. After dinner, Uncle Harold went to the living room to watch television as he did every night. Michael James and Aunt Patricia stayed in the kitchen, ostensibly tidying the dishes, but in reality waiting for the moment to leave. Michael James, before we talk to this man, I need you to tell me everything you already know, whispered Aunt Patricia. All right. But it's a lot, Aunt. Michael James briefly recounted his discovery of the inhabited cabin, the documents he found, his knowledge about Victor, and finally about Anthony and his revelation that his father was alive. Aunt Patricia listened to everything in silence, with tears in her eyes. "So Richard is really alive?" "He is, and he wants to come home. Why did he never contact us in these 3 years? Anthony says it was to protect us. Any contact could have put everyone in danger. And isn't it still dangerous now?" "It still is, but they have a plan to end the danger for good." When Uncle Harold went to sleep around 10 at night, Michael James and Aunt Patricia quietly left the house. The night was clear, but they used a small flashlight to light the path to the riverbank. "How long has it been since you came here at night, Aunt?" "Many years, my boy, since before your father disappeared." When they reached the ferry, Anthony was waiting for them on the deck, illuminated only by the full moon. Aunt Patricia hesitated for a moment before boarding the vessel. "Mrs. Patricia, a pleasure. My name is Anthony Foster," said the man, extending his hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Anthony. Michael James told me you have news about Richard." "I do, and it's good news." Anthony took them to the cabin where he had prepared some chairs and hot coffee. The atmosphere was cozy, despite the unusual circumstances. "Mrs. Patricia, your brother-in-law is well and very much wants to return home," began Anthony. "Where is he?" "In a safe place, a few hours from here. He had to distance himself because he discovered that Victor planned to harm your family." Aunt Patricia began to cry. 3 years, Mr. Anthony. 3 years I thought he had abandoned us." "He never abandoned you. Every day he asks about you and about Michael James. Every day he plans his return." "And why only now can he come back?" Anthony explained in detail the plan to use the media to expose Victor, the documentation work on fraud, and the strategy to protect all the families involved. With public exposure, Victor won't be able to retaliate without exposing himself even more. And the state authorities will have to act, since the local ones may be compromised. "And do you think it will work?" "We have very solid evidence, Mrs. Patricia, and now with Michael James securing the support of more families, we have enough testimonies for a devastating report." Aunt Patricia looked at Michael James with a mixture of pride and worry. "My boy got involved in something very dangerous." "He got involved because he inherited his father's courage," said Anthony, "and he was crucial to the plan's success." "And when will Richard return?" "Next Saturday, when the report airs. It will be the safest moment, because Victor will be dealing with a public crisis and won't have the time or resources to pursue anyone." "Just 5 more days?" "Just 5 more days." Aunt Patricia fell silent for a few minutes, processing everything she had heard. "Mr. Anthony, what can I do to help?" "You can help Michael James stay safe in the coming days. And if possible, you can try to discreetly talk to the other families involved, to prepare them for the interviews." "Which families?" Anthony showed her the list of names, and Aunt Patricia recognized all of them. "These people trust me. I can talk to them. But very carefully. We don't know if Victor has informants among the neighbors. I know how to be discreet. And there's one more important thing," said Anthony. "We need to prepare a safe place for Richard to stay when he returns. Your house might be watched. He can stay at my sister's house in Riverside. It's far enough to be safe, but close enough for us to visit." "Perfect. I'll pass this information to him." The conversation went on for another hour, with Anthony explaining all the details of the plan and answering Aunt Patricia's questions. When they finally said goodbye, the woman was visibly calmer and more determined. "Mr. Anthony, thank you for looking after my brother-in-law all these years, and thank you for looking after my Michael James now. Richard is like a brother to me, Mrs. Patricia, and Michael James is a special boy. You have a good family. And soon we'll be together again." On the way back home, Aunt Patricia was different. The anxiety had been replaced by a new energy, a sense of purpose. "Michael James, I'm proud of you." "Why, Aunt?" "For having the courage to discover the truth, for fighting to bring your father back. You're not mad because I lied. I'm not mad. You did what you needed to do, and now we're going to work together to finish this. Do you think everything will work out?" "I think so, my boy. For the first time in 3 years, I think so." That night, They both slept better than they had in a long time. They had a clear mission, a set deadline, and the certainty that they would soon be reunited with Richard. The next morning, Friday, Aunt Patricia woke up with renewed energy. She prepared a special breakfast and talked animatedly with Uncle Harold about the weekend plans. "Harold, I think I'll visit my sister in Riverside on Saturday. It's been a while since I've seen her." "That's a good idea. You've been very tense lately. A little break will do you good. I'll take Michael James with me. He also needs to get out of this town for a bit." "Great idea. The boy has been very thoughtful." After Uncle Harold left for work, Aunt Patricia turned to Michael James. "Today I'm going to start talking to the families on the list. Do you want to come with me?" "I do. I can help explain things." "Then let's start with Mrs. Martha from the bakery. She has always been a discreet and trustworthy person." Mrs. Martha from St. Joseph's Bakery was a 60-year-old woman who knew everyone in town. When Aunt Patricia and Michael James arrived at the bakery, she greeted them with a warm smile. "Patricia, Michael James, so good to see you. How are things?" "Well, Martha, actually we wanted to talk to you about a private matter." "Of course, let's go to the back." The conversation in the back of the bakery was direct and effective. Mrs. Martha had been one of Victor's first victims, losing her delivery van because of a loan with impossible interest rates. "I always knew that wasn't right," the woman said, "but what could a simple person like me do against a man with his power?" "Now you can do a lot," explained Michael James. "Together with other families, you can put an end to this." "And are you sure there won't be any retaliation?" "Martha, do you trust me?" asked Aunt Patricia. "With my life." "Then trust that this is safe and necessary." Mrs. Martha agreed to give a statement and also offered to help convince other families who frequented her bakery. "Many people come here and complain about the problems they've had with Victor. If I say there's a way to seek justice, I believe they'll agree to participate." "Perfect," said Aunt Patricia. "But be discreet. We don't know if he has informants in town." "I know how to be discreet. I haven't survived in this business for 20 years without knowing how to keep secrets." The second family on the list lived on the other side of town in a small house near the bus station. They were the Williamses, a young couple who had lost their motorcycle to Victor right after their wedding. When Aunt Patricia and Michael James arrived there, they found only Claudia, the wife, at home with a baby a few months old. "Hi, Mrs. Patricia." "Hi, Michael James. What brings you here?" "Hi, Claudia. We came to talk about the motorcycle you lost last year." The young woman's expression changed immediately. "Why do you want to talk about that?" she asked, visibly uncomfortable. "Because you might be able to get it back." "Get it back how?" Michael James explained about the investigation and the possibility of proving that Victor's contracts were fraudulent. "Do you still have the documents?" "We do. My husband kept them because he said one day he'd try to do something." "And where is your husband now?" "Working on a farm outside of town. He only comes back at the end of the week." "Would he agree to give a statement?" Claudia picked up the baby and thought for a moment. "I don't know. He was very angry when we lost the bike. He might want to participate, but he might also be afraid." "And you? What do you think?" "I think if there's a chance to get justice, we have to try, especially now that we have a child. So can you think it over and give us an answer by tomorrow?" "You can count on it. I'll talk with my husband tonight when he calls." The third family on the list was more complex. The Fosters had lost not only a car, but also their home because of a loan that turned into an impossible debt to pay. When they arrived at the small rented house where the family lived now, they were greeted by Mr. Manuel, a 40-year-old man who worked as a bricklayer. "Mrs. Patricia, Michael James, what a surprise. Please come in." The house was even smaller than the others they had visited, and it was clear the family faced serious financial difficulties. "Mr. Manuel, we came to talk about the problems you had with Victor." The man immediately became tense. "Why do you want to know about that?" "Because there might be a way to get justice." "Mrs. Patricia, with all due respect, justice for whom? Victor is still out there, rich and powerful, while my family lives in this cramped house." "But what if there was a way to change that?" Mr. Manuel sat in an old chair and looked at them skeptically. "What way?" Michael James explained about the journalistic investigation and the evidence they had gathered against Victor. Do you really think this could work? We do, but we need the help of courageous families like yours. Courageous or desperate? Both, perhaps, admitted Aunt Patricia, but mostly courageous. Mr. Manuel called his wife Mrs. Rose, who was looking after the children in the backyard. Rose, come here. These people are talking about a way to get justice against Victor. Mrs. Rose approached with curiosity and skepticism. What kind of justice? Public exposure, investigation of the fraud, possibly even recovering what you lost. And what do you want from us? For you to tell your story to a journalist, and if possible to allow the use of the loan documents as evidence. The couple exchanged a long, meaningful look. We need to talk about this between ourselves, said Mr. Manuel. Of course. Can you give us an answer by tomorrow? We can. But can I ask a question? Of course. Why are you doing this? What do you gain from helping families like ours? The question took Michael James by surprise, but Aunt Patricia answered without hesitation. Because we believe it's the right thing to do, and because we know what it's like to suffer injustice. Were you also harmed by him? In a different way, but yes, we were harmed. That answer seemed to satisfy Mr. Manuel, who became more receptive to the idea of participating in the investigation. We'll think it over carefully, promised Mrs. Rose. If there really is a chance to make a difference. There is, Michael James assured, and it will work. When they left the foster home, Aunt Patricia was visibly tired. They had spent the whole morning talking with people who carried heavy stories of injustice and suffering. It's hard to hear these stories, isn't it? Commented Michael James. It's very hard, but it also makes me more determined to see that man punished for what he did. Do you think all the families will agree to participate? I think so. They just need courage. And sometimes courage comes when you see you're not alone. In the afternoon, they decided to visit the last two families on the list. The first were the Mitchells, an elderly couple who had lost the car they used to transport vegetables to sell at the market. When they arrived at the simple house on the outskirts of town, they found Mr. Edward sitting on the porch, peeling cassava. Good afternoon, Mr. Edward, greeted Aunt Patricia. Good afternoon, Mrs. Patricia. Good afternoon, Michael James. Have a seat here in the shade. Thank you. How is Mrs. Natalie? She's fine. She's inside preparing dinner. Natalie, he shouted into the house. Come here, we have visitors. Mrs. Natalie appeared at the door, drying her hands on her apron. Patricia, what a joy. Come in, dear. I'd rather stay here on the porch, if you don't mind. It's cooler. Of course, of course. Edward, go get some coffee for our guests. While Mr. Edward went to prepare the coffee, Aunt Patricia took the opportunity to broach the subject with Mrs. Natalie. Natalie, we came to talk to you about the car you lost 2 years ago. The woman immediately became sad. That car was our livelihood, Patricia. It was how we earned our daily bread. I know, and perhaps there is a way for you to get justice. When Mr. Edward returned with the coffee, Aunt Patricia explained the whole situation. The couple listened attentively, asking questions and showing growing interest. You mean this man deceived many other people besides us? Many people, Mr. Edward. And now all these people can come together to seek justice. And you think it can work? We do, but we need courageous people like you. Mrs. Natalie looked at her husband. Edward, what do you think? I think we have nothing left to lose. And if we can help other families who went through what we went through, so you agree to give a statement? We do, said Mrs. Natalie firmly. At our age, we can't be afraid to do the right thing anymore. The last family on the list were the Nelsons, who lived in a small house in the city centre. They had lost a small clothing store to Victor, after a loan to expand the business turned into a financial trap. When Aunt Patricia and Michael James arrived, they found only Josephine, the couple's eldest daughter, about 20 years old. Hi, Mrs. Patricia. Hi, Michael James. My parents aren't here. They went out to look for work. What a shame. We came to talk to them about an important matter. Can I help with something? Actually, yes, you can. It's about the store your family lost. Josephine made a bitter expression. That sad story. What do you want to know about it? If your family would like to participate in an investigation, to prove you were deceived. An investigation how? Michael James explained the plan for the journalistic exposé and the evidence they had gathered. Do you really think this can work? We do. And your family would be very important for the investigation because you have a well-documented case. That's true. My parents kept all the paperwork. They always said they would try to do something one day. And what do you think? Would they agree to participate? I think so. They were very outraged by what happened, mainly because the store was their lifelong dream. Can you talk to them and give an answer by tomorrow? I can. Actually, I think I can answer now. They will want to participate, I'm sure. Are you really sure? Absolutely. My parents always said if they had a chance to get justice against that man, they wouldn't think twice. When they left the Nelson house, Aunt Patricia and Michael James had secured the commitment of every family on the list. It was a better result than they had hoped for. Michael James, I think we did it, said Aunt Patricia, satisfaction in her voice. We really did. All the families will participate. Now we just have to wait for the journalist to arrive and hope everything works out. It will work out, Aunt, I'm sure. When they arrived home in the late afternoon, Uncle Harold was in the kitchen preparing a snack. Where have you been all day? Visiting some people in town. It had been a while since I went out to see my friends, replied Aunt Patricia. That's good. You've been very closed up at home lately. That night, after Uncle Harold went to sleep, Aunt Patricia and Michael James talked about the preparations for the next day. Tomorrow I'll confirm with all the families and pass the final list to Anthony, said Aunt Patricia, and I'll help organize the documents we gathered. Michael James, are you prepared to see your father tomorrow? The question took the boy by surprise. In the rush of preparations, he had almost forgotten that the reunion would be the next day. I think I'm nervous. It's normal to be nervous. 3 years is a long time. Do you think he'll be different? Probably yes. People change with time and experiences, but his love for you never changed. How can you be so sure? Because Mr. Anthony told me how he talks about you. A man who speaks of his son with shining eyes after 3 years of separation is a man who never lost that love. That assurance calmed Michael James, who fell asleep thinking of the reunion that would happen in a few hours. On Saturday morning, they woke up earlier than usual. Aunt Patricia packed a small suitcase with clothes for a few days, maintaining the facade that they were visiting her sister in Riverside. Uncle Harold accompanied them to the bus station, where they supposedly would catch the bus to Riverside. Take care over there. And if you need anything, call me, said the man, hugging his nephew and sister-in-law. We'll be fine, Harold. It's just a quick visit, replied Aunt Patricia. After Uncle Harold walked away, they waited a few minutes and then returned home by another route. The journalist from Houston would arrive at noon, and they needed to be at the ferry to meet him. At 11:30, Aunt Patricia and Michael James were on the ferry, helping Anthony organize the documents and prepare the space for the interviews. The nervousness was visible in all of them. Did the families confirm they are coming? Asked Anthony. All confirmed, replied Aunt Patricia. They are excited about the possibility of getting justice. And the journalist? Should be here any minute. He said he was coming straight from the airport. That's when they heard the sound of a speedboat motor approaching. It was a vessel different from the ones that normally traveled the river, more modern and faster. That must be him, said Anthony, heading toward the edge of the ferry. The boat pulled up alongside the ferry, and a middle-aged man with graying hair and a professional camera hanging from his neck stepped off. Good morning. I'm Charles Henderson from the Regional News Network, the man introduced himself. Anthony Foster. Pleasure to meet you. This is Patricia and Michael James, from Richard's family. Pleasure to meet you all. Richard has told me so much about you. You've spoken to him? Asked Aunt Patricia eagerly. We have. He's on his way. He should be here within the next 2 hours. The news that Richard was indeed on his way deeply moved Aunt Patricia and Michael James. After 3 years, the reunion was finally about to happen. While we wait for him, how about we start with the interviews, suggested Charles. Perfect. The families should be arriving soon. As if on cue, several canoes began approaching the ferry. They were the families who had agreed to give their testimonies, all arriving punctually for what would be the most important moment of their lives in recent years. The first to arrive was Mrs. Catherine, rowing alone in a small canoe. She was dressed in her best clothes and carried a bag with all the documents related to her late husband's car. "Good morning, Michael James. Good morning, Mrs. Patricia," the lady greeted them. "Good morning, Mrs. Catherine. This is Charles, the journalist who will interview you." "A pleasure, Mrs. Catherine," said Charles, extending his hand. "Are you prepared to tell your story?" "I am. I've been waiting 3 years for this opportunity." Next to arrive were the Thompsons, Mrs. Mary and her husband Joseph, also bringing all their documents carefully organized. They greeted everyone and showed they were determined to participate in the report. "Mrs. Mary, how do you feel knowing your story might help other families?" asked Charles, already starting to record some footage. "I feel proud to be able to turn our pain into something that can make a difference." The Mitchells arrived next, Mr. Edward rowing slowly, while Mrs. Natalie held an old folder with their documents. "Mr. Edward, how long have you been waiting for an opportunity like this?" "Since the day we lost our car, young man. Since the day our lives changed for the worse because of that man's greed." Charles was impressed by the determination and dignity of each family. It was clear this report would be impactful. The Williams family arrived last, Claudia and her husband Ronald, who had managed to get the day off from work at the ranch to participate in the interview. "Ronald, your wife told me you lost the motorcycle right after you got married. How did that affect you?" "That bike was our means of transport, our means of work. Losing it was like losing our independence." When all the families were gathered on the ferry, Charles began recording an introduction for the report. "I'm here on the Mississippi River, in Riverside Springs, where we have uncovered a loan sharking scheme that has harmed dozens of hard-working families. What you are about to see in the following footage is an example of how greed can destroy lives, but also of how courage can bring justice." The interviews began individually, with each family telling their story in detail to the camera. Charles was an experienced journalist and knew how to guide the conversations to draw out not just the facts, but also the emotion behind each case. Mrs. Catherine was the first to be interviewed. Seated in the ferry's cabin, holding a photograph of her husband, she told how they had lost the car that represented the only valuable memory she had of her life companion. "My Raymond worked his whole life to buy that car. It was a Blue Beetle, well kept. When he passed, the car was all I had left of him," said the lady with tears in her eyes. "And how did you lose the vehicle?" "I needed money to pay for the medicine my Raymond was using before he passed. I looked for Victor because I was told he lent money quickly. He made me sign some papers I didn't fully understand." "And what happened after that?" "The interest was so high I could never manage to pay it back. In no time, the debt became larger than the value of the car. Then he took my Beetle." Charles was recording everything, capturing not just the words but also the genuine emotion in the woman's voice. "Mrs. Catherine, did you keep the documents from that loan?" "I kept everything. Even though it pains me to look at those papers, I kept it all." "And can you show us?" Mrs. Catherine opened her purse and took out the documents. Charles examined them in front of the camera, pointing out the most obvious irregularities. "Look here, everyone. This clause sets an interest rate of 15% per month. That is far above what is permitted by law. And here there's a penalty of 50% on the total amount for a delay of just 7 days. The interview with Mrs. Catherine lasted about 40 minutes, establishing a strong emotional tone for the entire report. The second interview was with the Thompson family. Mrs. Mary and her Joseph sat side by side, holding each other's hands as they told their story. "Our car was an inheritance from Mary's father," explained Mr. Joseph. "It was a simple car, but it was paid off. It was ours." "And why did you seek out Victor?" "Our daughter got sick and needed urgent surgery," answered Mrs. Mary. "The health insurance didn't cover it, and we didn't have enough money." "How much did you need?" $3,000. Victor said he would lend it for 6 months with low interest." "And what really happened?" "The interest wasn't low, and when we couldn't pay on time, he said the car was worth $10,000 and that our debt was already at $12,000, explained Mr. Joseph, anger in his voice. Charles showed the family's documents to the camera, highlighting the abusive clauses and the fraudulent interest calculations. "Here we have another clear case of loan sharking. Look, the amount lent was $3,000, but with penalties and compound interest, In 6 months, the debt had reached $12,000. And how did you feel when you lost the car? As if they had stolen our dignity, answered Mrs. Mary. It wasn't just a car, it was our history, our independence. The third interview was with the young couple, Claudia and Ronald, who represented a younger generation affected by Victor's scheme. You had just gotten married when you lost the motorcycle. Yes, answered Claudia, adjusting the baby in her lap. The bike was our means of transportation and also our source of income. Ronald made deliveries with it. And why did you seek out Victor? We wanted to buy furniture for our new home, explained Ronald. Victor said it was easy, that he would lend the money in 5 minutes. And was it really easy? To get the money it was. To pay it back was impossible. Charles continued documenting the details of each case, creating a comprehensive picture of the loan-sharking scheme that had affected so many families. While he was interviewing the Mitchells, the elderly couple who had lost the car they used to sell vegetables at the market, Michael James heard the sound of a speedboat approaching again. His heart raced. Could it be his father finally arriving? Anthony headed to the edge of the ferry to greet the newcomer, and Michael James followed him with growing anxiety. From the speedboat stepped a man around 40 years old, with slightly graying brown hair and a smile that Michael James recognized immediately, even after 3 years. It was Richard. His father had returned. "Dad!" shouted Michael James, running toward the man. "Michael James, my son." The reunion between father and son after 3 years of separation was too emotional to be described in words. They embraced in the middle of the ferry, surrounded by the families giving their testimonies and the journalist documenting everything. "How you've grown, my son," said Richard, with tears in his eyes. "You were so little when I left. Dad, I knew you'd come back, I always knew. And you figured it all out on your own? Anthony told me you were the one who started investigating the ferry. I wanted to understand why you left, and I discovered you didn't leave, you went to protect us." Richard looked at his son with pride and emotion. "You've become a courageous man, Michael James, more courageous than I am." "You are courageous too, Dad. You helped many families. And now we're going to help many more." Aunt Patricia approached timidly, still processing the fact that her brother-in-law had really returned. "Richard," she said simply. "Patricia, thank you for taking care of my son all these years. He's my nephew, it was my duty. It wasn't duty, it was love, and I will never forget that." The three embraced, finally reunited after so many years of separation and suffering. Charles, who was documenting the reunion with his camera, realized he was witnessing something very special. "Richard, can I interview you about the work you did to help these families?" "Of course. That's why I came back." Richard's interview was the most detailed and technical of all. He explained how he discovered Victor's scheme, how he documented the frauds, and how he developed strategies to return the illegally seized property to the families. "Richard, you spent 3 years away from your family to gather this evidence?" "I did. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it was necessary. Victor had threatened my family, and I needed to make sure he was neutralized before I returned." "And how did you manage to recover the cars and other property?" "With a lot of planning and care. First, I documented each case, proved there was fraud in the contract. Then I tried to negotiate with Victor, offering to settle the debt for the fair value without the predatory interest. And when he refused to negotiate, then I used alternative methods, always within the law, always documenting everything." "Alternative methods like what?" "Victor kept the confiscated property in a private warehouse. I managed to prove that this warehouse operated without the necessary licenses, and that much of the property stored there had been seized illegally. So I recovered that property to return it to the rightful owners." Charles was impressed with the level of organization and planning Richard had employed in his mission. "And you never thought of going to the local authorities?" "I did, but I discovered that some of the local authorities had a close relationship with Victor. My complaint would have been buried, and I would have been even more exposed." "Is that why you went to the press?" "Exactly. Public exposure was the only way to ensure the state authorities would take notice and be forced to act." As Charles finished his interview with Richard, the families present talked among themselves, sharing their experiences and creating a feeling of community and collective strength. "Mrs. Catherine, are you prepared for what might happen when this report airs?" asked Mrs. Mary Thompson. "I am prepared, my dear. At my age, one no longer has time to be afraid of doing the right thing." "And you, Claudia and Ronald?" "We're nervous," admitted Ronald, "but it's a good kind of nervous. We're finally going to see justice done." Charles concluded all the interviews by late afternoon. He had collected over 5 hours of testimonies, enough documents to prove dozens of cases of fraud, and images that told a powerful human story. "Everyone, I want to thank you all for your courage," said the journalist. "This report will air in the National Sunday newspaper edition. Over 10 million people will learn your stories." "And what happens after?" asked Mr. Edward. "Afterwards, the state authorities will be forced to investigate, and you will have all the necessary legal support to recover what you lost." "All the legal support?" asked Mrs. Catherine. "The regional news network has a partnership with a human rights organization. They will provide free lawyers for all of you." The news that they would have professional legal support left all the families emotional and hopeful. As Charles was preparing to leave, Richard made one final appeal to the camera. "I want to take this opportunity to apologize to the families of Riverside Springs for leaving without explanation. I didn't want to abandon you. I wanted to protect you and find a definitive solution to the problem that plagued us. And now, do you believe you've found that solution?" "I do. With the exposure this report will generate, Victor won't be able to operate in the shadows anymore, and the families will have the necessary legal tools to recover what is rightfully theirs." After Charles departed, the families began saying goodbye and returning to their homes. Each carried a renewed hope that they would finally see justice done. Richard, Aunt Patricia, and Michael James were alone on the ferry for the first time in 3 years. "And now, Richard?" asked Aunt Patricia. "Now we wait for the report to air tomorrow and hope everything works out." "And after?" "After, I go home, to stay." Michael James smiled upon hearing those words. Finally, his family would be reunited again. "Dad, can you tell me about these 3 years? About where you were?" "I can, my son. I have a lot to tell you." Richard began recounting his journey over the last 3 years, how he had hidden in small towns in the region, always moving when he felt he was being sought, how he had worked simple jobs to support himself while continuing his investigation into Victor. "The hardest part wasn't the simple life I was leading," explained Richard. "It was missing you. Every day I woke up thinking about when I could return home." "Why did you never try to make contact?" "Because any contact could have put you in danger. Victor had people watching our house, watching the two of you. If he knew I was trying to communicate, he could have used you to force me to stop the investigation." "And how did you know you were being watched?" "Anthony kept me informed about everything happening in town. He told me about strange men asking questions about our family, about attempts at intimidation." Aunt Patricia listened to everything in silence, finally fully understanding the sacrifice her brother-in-law had made for love of family. "Richard, you must be tired from these 3 years away from home." "I'm exhausted, Patricia, but I'm also happy. We finally managed to do what needed to be done." "And are you sure it's safe to return now?" "I am. Starting tomorrow, when the report airs, Victor will be fighting for his own survival. He won't have the time or resources to seek revenge on anyone." "What if he tries to flee the region?" "We've already arranged for the state authorities to be notified about that possibility. He's been under surveillance since yesterday." The conversation lasted all night, with Richard telling details of his life over the past few years, and Michael James recounting how he had discovered the truth about the ferry. "Dad, I always knew you'd come back," said Michael James, snuggled close to his father. "How did you know, my son?" "Because you always told me that family is the most important thing in the world, and whoever truly believes that always finds a way to come home." Richard hugged his son, moved by the boy's maturity and wisdom. "You've grown so much, Michael James, and not just in height. Aunt Patricia taught me many important things. She is a special woman, and you are a special boy. And now can we live like a normal family?" "We can. Starting Monday, we'll begin our normal life again." On Sunday morning, the 3 got up early to watch the report that would air on the national news. They had brought a small television onto the barge, and waited anxiously for the broadcast. At 8 in the morning, the report began. Charles Henderson appeared on screen, in front of the barge, introducing the story. "Good morning. I'm here in rural Texas to show you a story of courage, injustice, and finally hope. What you're about to see in the following footage could be happening in your town, too." The report lasted 15 minutes and was devastating for Victor. Each family told their story with emotion and dignity. The fraudulent documents were clearly exposed, and Richard explained in detail how the scheme worked. "This is a reality in many small towns across the United States," concluded Charles. "Vulnerable people being exploited by unscrupulous loan sharks. But this story also shows us that unity and courage can overcome injustice." When the report ended, Richard, Aunt Patricia, and Michael James sat in silence for a few minutes, processing what they had just seen. "It's incredible to see our story told like that," said Aunt Patricia. "And to see how other people have gone through similar problems," added Michael James. "The most important thing is that now the story isn't just ours anymore," said Richard. "It belongs to the whole country, and that changes everything." For the rest of Sunday, they received dozens of calls from people who had seen the report, journalists from other outlets wanting more details, lawyers offering help, and especially people from other towns sharing that they had been through similar situations. "Richard, your strategy worked," said Anthony, who had arrived at the barge in the late afternoon. "Victor won't be able to recover from this exposure. And what do we know about him since yesterday? He tried to leave town overnight but was intercepted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation on the highway. He's in custody for questioning. So it's over. It's over. His bank accounts have been frozen, the vehicle impound lot has been sealed, and a federal investigation has been opened." The news that Victor had been detained spread quickly through the town. During Sunday night, Richard, Aunt Patricia, and Michael James received visits from several of the families who had participated in the report. They were all euphoric with the news and grateful for the work that had been done. "Richard, how can we thank you for what you did for us?" asked Mrs. Catherine. "There's no need to thank me. You did the hardest part, which was having the courage to speak publicly." "And now, what happens to our cars?" asked Mr. Joseph Thompson. "The authorities will make an inventory of everything in Victor's impound lot. The vehicles that were illegally confiscated will be returned to their original owners." "And will that take long?" "A few weeks at most. Now that the case has national attention, the authorities will act quickly." "And the money we lost?" "That will be recovered too. Victor's assets will be used to compensate all the victims." The families left the barge that night with a feeling of victory and justice they hadn't felt in years. On Monday morning, Richard, Aunt Patricia, and Michael James returned home for the first time as a reunited family. Uncle Harold was surprised to see Richard, but welcomed his brother-in-law with joy and understanding. "Richard, it's so good to have you back," the man said, hugging his brother-in-law. "Thank you, Harold, and thank you for taking care of my family while I was away. They're my family, too." In the following days, life in Riverside Springs was completely transformed. The news report had drawn the attention of state and federal authorities, who launched investigations not only into Victor, but into similar schemes across the entire region. Lawyers arrived in town to help the victimized families, and a restitution fund was created to repay all the financial losses caused by the loan sharking scheme. A week after the report aired, Mrs. Catherine was the first to recover her property. The Blue Beetle that had belonged to her husband was returned exactly as it was when it was confiscated, including some personal items that were in the glove compartment. "Michael James," the lady said when he came to visit her, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for me." "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Catherine. It was an honor to be able to help. You gave me back more than a car, my boy. You gave me back a piece of my Raymond." One by one, all the families recovered their lost possessions. The Thompsons got back the car that had belonged to Mrs. Mary Thompson's father. The Williamses recovered the motorcycle they used for work. The Mitchells once again had their vehicle to sell vegetables at the market. Each return was a small celebration in the town, and Richard became a local hero for developing the plan that made it all possible. 2 months after the report, Victor was sentenced to 12 years in prison for loan sharking, forming a criminal organization and fraud against vulnerable people. All his assets were auctioned to compensate the victims, and his organization was completely dismantled. But the most important transformation wasn't the punishment of Victor or the recovery of lost property. It was the way the Riverside Springs community came together throughout the whole process. The families who had been victims created an association to help other people who might be going through similar situations. Mrs. Eleanor became the association's president, using her network of contacts to identify possible cases of financial exploitation. Richard decided to use his experience to work officially with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, helping to identify and dismantle loan sharking schemes in other regions of the country. "Daddy, are you going to travel again?" asked Michael James, afraid his father would have to leave again. "I will travel, yes, my son, but now it's official work, and you can come with me whenever you want. And the ferry. The ferry is going to become a floating community center, a place where people can come to seek help, guidance, or simply to talk." The ferry, which had been a subject of jokes and scorn, became the symbol of the community's resilience and solidarity. Anthony continued to take care of the place, but now as an official employee of the association created by the victimized families. 6 months after it all began, Michael James was on the ferry again, but this time accompanied by other children from the town who came to participate in the educational activities held there. "Michael James, do you regret getting involved in all this?" asked one of the children, fascinated by the story they had heard from the adults. "Never," the boy replied, looking at the river flowing calmly beside the ferry. "It was the most important adventure of my life." "Why?" "Because I learned that sometimes people need to be brave to do the right thing, and that when good people come together, they can overcome any injustice." "And you weren't afraid?" "I was very afraid. But my father always taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is doing the right thing even when you are scared." From a distance, Richard watched his son talking with the other children and felt a deep satisfaction. Michael James had transformed into a wise and courageous young man who would carry forever the lessons learned during those difficult months. Aunt Patricia approached Richard on the riverbank. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking it was worth it. All the suffering, all the separation. It was worth it to reach this moment. And I'm thinking that our family became stronger after all of this." It did, and Michael James learned lessons that will guide him for the rest of his life. In the late afternoon, when all the activities had ended and the children had returned to their homes, Michael James, Richard, and Aunt Patricia were alone on the ferry, watching the sunset over the Mississippi River. "Dad, can I ask a question?" "Of course, my son." "If you could go back in time, would you do everything the same?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "I would do everything the same, Michael James, because the end result was worth every day of suffering." "And you don't regret having taken so many risks?" "What I would regret would be having stood by and watched good people being harmed by someone cruel. That is something I would regret for the rest of my life." Michael James smiled, completely understanding his father's answer. "So we did the right thing?" "We did the right thing, my son. And we will always do the right thing, even when it's hard." As the sun slowly set over the river, tinting the water gold and orange, the three remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey they had traveled together. The ferry that Michael James had inherited as an apparently worthless inheritance had transformed into the foundation of a new life for the entire community. More than that, it had become a symbol that love, courage, and determination can overcome any adversity. And Michael James, who had begun that adventure as an orphan boy, curious about a mysterious inheritance, had transformed into a young man who understood that the greatest inheritances are not made of iron and wood, but of values, principles, and memories that can last forever. When the stars began to appear in the dark sky, Richard, Aunt Patricia, and Michael James returned home, knowing that the next day they would wake as a complete family in a fairer community with a future full of possibilities. The ferry remained floating calmly on the river, illuminated only by the full moon, guarding the secrets of a story of courage that would be told for many generations in the town of Riverside Springs. A story that proved that even in the most unlikely places, even in the most difficult situations, good can always triumph over evil when courageous people unite for a just cause. And among so many lessons learned, Michael James understood the most important one of all, that the true value of an inheritance lies not in what it is, but in what it can become when it is cared for with love and transformed with purpose. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Michael James made the right decision by getting involved in the investigation? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.